It started with something small, a text message. "Mom, dinner's canceled tonight, rain check." That was all it said, no explanation, no apology, just canceled. I stared at the message longer than I should have. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 72 years old, and I have one son, Daniel. For 39 years, I have never missed a birthday, a graduation, a hospital visit, a single Thanksgiving. When his father died, I raised him alone. 2 jobs. No complaints, and every Sunday for the past 15 years, we've had dinner together. Sunday was never canceled. Never, but that afternoon, something felt off. I had already prepared the lemon pie he loves, still warm on the counter. I told myself not to be dramatic. Young families get busy, schedules change. Still, I picked up the pie, wrapped it carefully, and got in my car just to drop it off. I told myself, just to surprise them. The house was only 15 minutes away. The closer I got, the quieter my chest felt. You know that feeling, when something is wrong but you don't have proof yet? As I turned onto their street, I saw cars, 3 of them. Parked along the curb. Daniel had said dinner was canceled. The windows glowed warmly against the evening sky. I slowed the car. Laughter spilled out faintly when someone opened the front door. Laughter, not chaos, not emergency. Laughter. I parked across the street. For a moment, I sat there gripping the steering wheel. Maybe it's neighbors, I told myself. Maybe I misunderstood. But as I stepped out of the car, I smelled it. Roast chicken, garlic, rosemary. My Sunday recipe? The one I taught his wife, Claire, 5 years ago. My hands trembled slightly as I walked up the driveway. Through the dining room window, I saw them. Daniel at the head of the table. Claire beside him. Her parents across from them. 2 friends I didn't recognize. Candles lit. Wine poured, plates full, no empty chair, not one. I stood there long enough to see Daniel laugh, really laugh. The kind of laugh that used to fill my kitchen when he was 10 years old. Claire leaned toward him and whispered something. He squeezed her hand. The doorbell rang under my finger before I could stop myself. The laughter paused. Footsteps approached. Claire opened the door, her face changed instantly. "Oh, just that. Oh, I thought dinner was canceled," I said gently, holding up the pie like evidence. Daniel appeared behind her. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, not surprise, annoyance. "Mom," he said carefully, stepping outside and closing the door behind him. "It wasn't a big thing, just something small." "Something small," I nodded. "I just came to drop this off." He didn't take the pie. "You didn't have to," he replied. I heard a chair scrape inside, someone asking, "Everything okay?" Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "Yeah," he called over his shoulder. "Just a mix-up, a mix-up." I felt the words settle into my bones. "I didn't want you to feel obligated," he continued quietly. Claire's parents were already coming. It would have been crowded. Crowded, the word echoed. I raised him in a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom and no air conditioning. Crowded had never stopped us before. "I see," I said, and I did. Claire appeared again. "We'll call you next week, Eleanor," she said politely. Eleanor. Not Mom, not Mrs. Whitmore, just Eleanor. Daniel took the pie from my hands finally. "We'll enjoy this later," he said, later. The door closed gently, soft, final. I stood on the porch for a few seconds longer than necessary, listening to the laughter resume. It resumed quickly, too quickly, as if I had been an interruption, not a mother, an interruption. The drive home felt longer than 15 minutes. I replayed every conversation from the past few months. The shorter phone calls, the postponed visits, the times Claire answered instead of Daniel. Had this been building, or had I simply refused to see it? When I got home, the house felt unusually quiet, not lonely, just aware. I placed the empty pie dish I had brought back, yes, I brought it back, on the counter. And for the first time in 72 years, I asked myself a question I never thought I would need to ask. When did I stop being included? The next morning, Daniel didn't call, not to apologize, not to explain, just silence. I told myself he was busy. Successful people are busy. That's what I've said for years when neighbors asked why I didn't see him as often anymore. But busyness has a pattern. This felt different. This felt intentional. 3 days passed before my phone finally rang. It wasn't Daniel, it was Claire. Her voice was sweet, controlled. "We didn't mean for that to be awkward," she said. "It just felt easier to keep it small." Small. I folded a dish towel carefully while she spoke. "I understand," I replied. There was a pause on the other end. As if she expected more, guilt, Anger, something she could respond to, but I gave her nothing. I just think, she continued delicately, that sometimes it's important for Daniel to have space to build his own traditions. Build his own traditions. I stared at the calendar on my refrigerator, 15 years of Sunday dinners marked in pen. Little check marks beside each one. Traditions don't just appear, they're built, slowly, with time and consistency. I see, I said again. And once again, I did. A week later, I drove past their house by accident. Or at least that's what I told myself. It was Thursday evening. Through the window, I saw something that made my stomach tight. The dining room table had been replaced. Longer, wider, new chairs, 8 seats. I counted twice. 8, there had always been 6 before. 6 meant room for me, 8 meant expansion. But expansion without invitation, that Sunday came. No text, no cancellation, no invitation, just nothing. I waited until 5 o'clock, then 6. At 7 I turned off the oven. The roast I had prepared sat untouched. The phone never rang. 2 weeks later, Daniel finally stopped by. Alone, he stood in my doorway with the stiffness of someone fulfilling an obligation. "You've been quiet," he said. I almost smiled. Quiet, as if absence were my choice. "I didn't want to intrude," I replied gently. He shifted his weight. "It's just things are changing, Mom." Mom, at least he still used that. Claire feels like we need boundaries. Boundaries. The word felt clinical, as if I had been trespassing on something fragile. "I've never crossed a boundary," I said softly. "It's not like that," he insisted quickly. "It's just we're building something." Building, always building. But why did building something new require dismantling something old? He avoided eye contact, and that's when I knew this wasn't entirely his voice. It carried someone else's rhythm, someone else's framing. "I don't want you to feel replaced," he added awkwardly. Replaced. The word hung between us. I studied his face. The boy who once refused to sleep without the hallway light on. The teenager who called me from college just to ask how to cook rice. The man who now looked like he was negotiating a contract. "I don't feel replaced," I said carefully. "I feel removed." He didn't respond to that. He just exhaled. Relieved that I wasn't yelling, relieved that I wasn't demanding, relieved that I was making it easy. Daniel left 20 minutes later. He didn't stay for tea. A few nights after that, I made a mistake. I called at the wrong time. Claire answered. "Oh, we're actually at dinner," she said quickly. "In town? No, just at home. With friends, again, I don't know what made me do it, but after we hung up, I drove there. I didn't get out of the car this time. I didn't walk to the porch. I simply parked down the street and waited. Cars lined the curb. Music drifted faintly through open windows. Laughter rose and fell in waves. And when the curtains shifted slightly, I saw the table again. Full, 8 seats occupied, Daniel at the head, Claire glowing beside him, her parents, 2 couples. And in the seat where I once sat, a tall woman with blonde hair leaned toward Daniel, listening intently as he spoke. She touched his arm when she laughed, the way I used to when he told childhood stories. I realized then it wasn't about space. It wasn't about crowding. It wasn't even about Claire. It was about transition. I was being transitioned out, not abruptly, not cruelly, but methodically. Dinner by dinner, seat by seat. Until my absence felt normal. As I drove home, something inside me shifted. Not heartbreak, not anger, clarity. For 72 years, I had believed motherhood was permanent, but permanence requires participation from both sides. And Daniel had begun building a life where I was optional. Optional. That word settled heavier than exclusion. When I got home, I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept old recipe cards. Daniel's favorites. His childhood handwriting on a few of them. I ran my fingers across the edges. And for the first time, I didn't feel desperate to be invited back. I felt something else, something quieter, dignity. If I was being erased gently, perhaps I didn't need to fight for space at a table that no longer held my chair. Perhaps the next move wasn't confrontation. Perhaps it was distance. Autumn arrived without asking permission. The leaves outside my kitchen window turned the same deep gold as the tablecloth I used every Sunday for 15 years. I folded that tablecloth carefully one afternoon and placed it in a drawer, not in anger, in acceptance. I stopped calling, stopped preparing extra portions, stopped waiting for 5 o'clock on Sundays, and something interesting happened. The silence grew louder on their end. 3 weeks passed before Daniel noticed. He called on a Tuesday evening. "Hey Mom, haven't heard from you." I smiled softly at the phone. I didn't want to intrude. There was that word again. He hesitated. "That's not what I meant." But it was. He just didn't like hearing it reflected back. "I assumed you were busy," I continued gently. "Building," he exhaled. "We are." Of course they were. A few days later I received an invitation, a printed one. Claire's handwriting on the envelope. Holiday dinner 7 p.m. No mention of Sunday, no mention of tradition, just an event. I almost declined, almost, but something told me to go. When I arrived, the house looked different. New paint, new art, new dining set polished and extended. 8 chairs again, I counted out of habit. Daniel greeted me politely, polite like I was a neighbor. Claire hugged me lightly, careful not to wrinkle her silk blouse. Dinner began, conversation flowed easily between the guests. Business deals, travel plans, investments. I listened, smiled when appropriate. But I felt like a visitor in a museum of a life I used to belong to. Halfway through dinner, Daniel mentioned a childhood story. The time he broke his arm climbing the oak tree in our old yard. He laughed, told it incorrectly. He said he had been 12. He was 9. He said his father had taken him to the hospital. It was me. I had carried him, sat beside him all night, memorized the rhythm of the heart monitor because I was afraid to fall asleep. But at that table, that version of history didn't include me. And that was when it became clear it wasn't just physical space I had lost, it was narrative space. I had been edited. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Daniel collapsed at work. Stress, they said, exhaustion. The hospital called Claire first. Claire called me last. When I arrived, she stood outside the ICU doors, pale and shaken. "He keeps asking for you," she whispered, "for me." I stepped into the room quietly. Daniel looked smaller somehow. Machines surrounding him, monitors blinking steadily. He opened his eyes when he heard my voice. "Mom," not Eleanor, not polite, just Mom. I took his hand. It felt like it had when he was 10 and afraid of the dark. "I'm here," I said. He swallowed. I didn't realize how far things had shifted. Shifted, such a gentle word for something so sharp. "I thought I was protecting balance," he continued weakly. "I didn't want conflict, so he chose absence instead." "You didn't lose your seat at the table," he said quietly. I just stopped looking at it. There it was. Not manipulation, not cruelty, avoidance. Claire had encouraged space, yes, but Daniel had allowed it, because redefining priorities is easier than defending them. I squeezed his hand gently. "I never wanted the whole table," I said. "Just my chair." Tears gathered in his eyes. The boy inside the man resurfaced. "I'm sorry." I believed him, but something inside me had already changed. Apologies rebuild bridges. They don't restore time. Daniel recovered, slowly. He began visiting more often, calling on Sundays, inviting me again, but I no longer rearranged my life around those invitations. I had joined a book club, started volunteering at the community center, reconnected with 2 old friends I had neglected while waiting by a silent phone. And when Daniel asked if we could restart Sunday dinners, I smiled. "Sometimes traditions evolve," I said gently. "We meet twice a month now. Not every week, not out of obligation, but intention. And when I sit at that table, I don't cling, I don't compete, I don't count chairs, because I learned something important. You cannot force your way back into a space that quietly removed you, but you can choose where you sit next." On her verse, we speak about something many don't admit. Exclusion doesn't always arrive with cruelty. Sometimes it arrives politely, gradually, until one day you realize you've been edited out. So let me ask you something gently. If someone stopped saving you a seat, would you beg for it back, or would you build a table of your own? Sometimes dignity is not fighting for a place. It's knowing you were always worthy of one.